America had invaded Afghanistan, and the initial assaults were a success for the Americans. Their weaponry and resources were much more advanced than that of the Taliban. Fighting often occurred in the mountains where multiple groups of Taliban could quickly hide if they were overrun. The speed with which America started the invasion was startling to all NATO countries. Many could not keep up, and Dutch Prime Minister Wim Kok issued the advancements of modern support weapons for their troops. In the days following, the Americans had made a huge impact on the war in the western parts of the country, but only moved little by little in the rough mountain terrain. In the third week of October 2001, Mali, one of the biggest countries dealing with the zombie horde, fell, and the undead gained a massive amount of walkers which started to head towards nearby Algeria. But America was mainly focused on Afghanistan, moving their troops in the west up north to hopefully close the gap between the west and east armies. One of the most peculiar occurrences in northern Africa was that the southern half of the small country Togo was able to hold against the zombies, not because they had such a powerful fighting force, but because they were able to set up enough defenses to keep them out. They had the sea at one side, giving them the advantage that they only needed to defend the north. Though direct contact could not be established, many believed President Gnazingbe Eyadema built a giant wall to hold out the zombies. Though many saw this as a sparkle of hope, it was only a matter of time before the increasing amount of walkers would become too much for even the wall to protect them. Another reason why they were able to withstand is that Eyadema authorized incredibly strict rules, handing out gas masks to the ones behind the wall and a requirement of bodies to be burned if they died of sickness, even as little as an old person by a mere cold. Gaddafi had also prematurely closed his borders, but for the moment, this had little to no impact. Just as his armor tactic, the fact that the infection was spreading amongst his people meant it would not solve the problems by keeping the zombies out. They would only buy time before another uprising would start in Libya itself. The zombie horde was ferocious. Though slow, their impressive numbers barged further and further into Nigeria, as well on the western shores of northern Africa. As the war with Afghanistan had reached almost its first month, the American army had gained more ground, but still was not able to liberate the main city of Kabul. But it was only a matter of time before the three main fronts would connect and the city would be taken. The soldiers at the north still had the most trouble. They suffered the most casualties as they were victim to ambushes in the mountains and armor assaults by enemy soldiers. Shortly after, Niger fell too, and the zombies entered the vicinity of Chad and Libya. Due to Gaddafi closing his borders earlier with increased defenses, the zombies had more difficulty getting through, but the horde had increased so much that 100% coverage was not possible. The size of the zombie horde had now reached alarming numbers. Rallies all over the world were held for the Western countries to come to Africa's aid. The truth in the matter was that most politicians were too afraid to make the first move. If a war was unleashed that led to a catastrophic result, it could mean the end of the world. No one wanted to be responsible for that. So the question was, who would dare to make a gamble like this? Canada certainly wasn't. Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien was currently focused on infrastructural concerns, but did authorize a move of armed forces towards the coast if they were called into battle. Chrétien firmly stood by the notion that Canada itself would never be the instigator of conflict. In November, the virus, not the horde, spread to more countries, but once again, mostly south. People were impressed and praised Mubarak that he kept the virus within his country, as experts had predicted a spread towards Israel many weeks before. As it stood, Israel was still free of the virus. Nevertheless, the virus was on their doorstep, with reports of sightings in northern Sinai. The first zone that would be hit by the virus was the Gaza area, that through years of conflict would be a thriving area for the virus to spread. After the earlier actions by Sweden to strengthen their bond with Germany, they continued the international talks, this time with the Baltic states. Because the Baltic states recently joined NATO, experts indeed believed, as with the Germany focus, that Sweden was influencing their political power with NATO without actually being in it. If it was Prime Minister Göran Persson's intent to join NATO eventually, was not yet known. Neighboring Finland also started an economic shift towards strengthening and expanding their Ministry of Defense. There might be a chance that the Scandinavian countries would perform the role of a defending fallback line, and if it would come to this, Prime Minister Paavo Lipponen promised the Finns would be ready. In Afghanistan, the Western and Southern armies had connected, and half the country was in the hands of the Americans. The Northern Army had gained little territory, losing even some on the eastern side. 70% of the US casualties of the war came from that region. The Southern Army now headed east to start surrounding Kabul city. If attacked from 2 or even 3 directions, the city would fall within 3 days. The same attitude as Finland was also held by Ireland. The Irish and British were known not to go along well with each other, but the Irish knew that what would happen to Great Britain would also affect them. Irish Prime Minister Bertie Ahern assured Prime Minister Tony Blair that the Irish would not back down.
Of course, I acknowledged the other day, and acknowledged again today, that the ultimate decision is by the British government on these issues. But I have, needless to say, to state what the position of the Irish government would be, and I think people will understand that.
As the war in Afghanistan roared on with the US claiming more ground every day, the unfortunate news arrived that Togo had fallen. How this happened, whether the wall was breached or an infection spread from within, was not known. Gaddafi's tactics of closing the borders did indeed seem to help, as the zombies were barely able to enter the country. But Nigeria was not so lucky. They received a major hit of the first wave of zombies, and had to pay the price as they rapidly lost more and more terrain with each week. Seeing the bigger countries in northern Africa fall to the zombie horde, the Moroccan Prime Minister Abderrahmane Youssoufy was not as optimistic as his predecessor and pleaded on an issue of international alliances. The Moroccan community had a large presence in Central Europe, and Youssoufy's plea for help might urge some Western politicians to take the first step. Others feared that more drastic measures needed to be taken before someone would have the guts to do something about it. America had made a huge breakthrough in Afghanistan as the Northern Army finally was connected to the Southern and Western forces. The Taliban soldiers in the northern provinces were cut off. They would instead go into hiding, meaning it would still take a long time to find them, but at least the American soldiers in the north had received some backup. But Africa cared little for this, as Nigeria was overrun in an alarming short time. Cameroon was next. Imagery from satellites showed the zombie horde as a cancer eating away at human civilization and what once was. Several countries in Europe had changed their economy law to an early mobilization. Holland was one of them. With this change of law, the construction speed of both military and civilian factories would be increased, therefore also increasing Holland's war effort. Holland's political environment also continued in the predicted international policy direction. With this, technological expertise could be exchanged, giving Holland access to more advanced equipment. Gaddafi's strategy of closing the borders could only work for so long, as the zombies had broken through and now were spreading rapidly across the country. The flat terrain worked in their favor, as they were not obstructed by jungle or mountains. Poland was shifting its focus towards resources. They realized that the military demand from the unavoidable conflict that was looming on the horizon would require an amount of resources they could not cope with. Therefore, a new strategy and contracts regarding resource gathering and distribution needed to be made. US President George W. Bush set in motion preparations to improve the American soldiers' equipment models. With a victory in Afghanistan in sight, it was once again time to shift focus towards the zombies, as well as neighboring Middle Eastern countries with terrorist regimes. Bush felt that a change in equipment would be in its place. But then on the 14th of December 2001, the most drastic change yet occurred. In a final desperate act, the political higher-ups of Mauritania had achieved an emergency acceptance within NATO. This came out of nowhere and shocked the whole world. Now, the Western world would no longer have a choice. It was a contractual obligation for them to come to their allies' aid, of which Mauritania was now one of them. Mauritania had lost too many men already, and its politicians too knew that their country would fall before help would arrive. But they hoped that they would be remembered as the country that had achieved the aid of the Western world. Experts believed that the migration of troops to invade Africa would still take several months, but at least now, they expected America and all other NATO countries to officially declare a state of war against the zombies within the next month. A worldwide war was on the brink of erupting.